The case of Beanie Siegel's rap career is one of the most frustrating in my opinion because I feel like he had massive potential but didn't reach the heights that he could have. And I know my expectations mean nothing to this man's life, but as a fan I get emotionally invested, and because of that it can be frustrating to watch some of these things happen. But those are simply my opinions and nothing more. I must say he was highly successful and had a great career as a rapper. My argument in this video is that his potential could have allowed him to go even further than where he actually got. Beanie dropped his debut album titled The Truth to commercial and critical success in February of the year 2000. Later in October of that year, Jay-Z dropped the Dynasty album, which was a compilation of Roc-a-Fella artists that had many great performances, but in my opinion, Beans is the one who had the standout performance, and those two albums were his introduction to the world. He went on to have hit records, a clothing line, and his own record label, and was primed to be a big deal in hip-hop. But despite having all those opportunities, he lost steam somewhere down the line. Now, in order to understand why many people are so passionate about Beanie, you simply need to hear a few of his verses and it becomes pretty clear that he had the it factor. The emotion and earnestness he puts into his tracks is apparent. Songs like This Can't Be Life, Where Have You Been, Feel It in the Air, and Die are all great examples of this characteristic. His voice was distinct, but more important than that, his lyrics and his demeanor at large had believability and relatability. And those are rare qualities. Those are some of the same qualities that I think make Tupac's music so potent. There are tens of thousands of good lyricists out there and many more will pop up as humanity exists. But many artists fail to write and deliver their content in a manner that convinces listeners to believe that what the artist is saying is a true reflection of their emotions, thoughts, beliefs, and so on. I cannot overstate the importance of these two qualities. You see, once people believe in something, they are more likely to invest in it emotionally. In the case of Beanie, his words, his delivery, his storytelling, his dressing, his voice all work together to create an aura of authenticity. From a business perspective, when your fans believe in and they relate to you as an artist, those fans are more likely to create an emotional connection with you, which then makes them more likely to buy your music, your merch, attend your shows, and so on. And trust me, super fans exist out there who are willing to spend bucket loads of money on their favorite artists because of their emotional connection to the artist is so strong. On top of that, Beanie's music had a vulnerability to it which made it sound very human. You could hear the conviction in his words and it was easy to feel his pain, which adds to the relatability factor that I talked about earlier. In my opinion, he's one of the most potent rappers of the early to mid 2000s, and that is what I think made him stand out in a vast sea of rappers in his class. Beanie rose pretty quickly into the limelight and even overtook other Roc-a-Fella artists such as Memphis Bleek, whom many thought would be Jay-Z's successor artistically, but that's a conversation for another video. Siegel's first few albums, along with the various singles he appeared on alongside Jay, helped bolster his public image. I remember being in high school and being obsessed with the Dynasty album because of Beanie's verses. I played that album for like 2 years straight and I felt the pain on his verse in Where Have You Been as if I'd been in a similar situation. And I hadn't. I still play those songs to this day because the music sounds like it came from a real place. And it's so easy to respect someone who's honest. He went on to release multiple albums over the years to varying degrees of success, and is often the case, each album's sales numbers dropped as the artist's career progressed. In the mid-2000s, Roc-a-Fella Records, as we had come to know it, faced turmoil as Jay-Z, Dame Dash, and Biggs parted ways due to internal conflict. That affected many relationships within the label. Some artists went with Jay and Roc-a-Fella, while others went with Dame Dash and Biggs to their newly formed company, Dame Dash Music Group. Beanie was one of the ones that went with Dame, but his group mates from State Property stayed with Roc-a-Fella instead, which caused Beans to question their loyalty. There were a lot of talented artists in that group, and sometimes I wonder what may have become of them if they'd stayed intact and pursued their careers under one roof. but we will never get to know that. Beanie's Becoming album, which was released on Dame's label, did well, but ultimately Dame Dash Music Group didn't succeed at the same level as Roc-a-Fella. And by his next album, titled The Solution, he had re-signed with The Roc and released his final album under the Roc family. His next two albums were not released with The Roc, they were released under other entities. Now, one of the most unfortunate things is that while Beanie was enjoying his success with his music, he was constantly having run-ins with the law. Prison time is one of the most notorious stoppers of momentum, and Beanie's wasn't an exception. People move on really fast because music and the times change. Few artists such as Boosie Badass, T.I., and Tupac managed to make themselves bigger after incarceration. But for most artists, once that time passes, it's gone and they become legacy acts. Sadly, Beanie Sigel was never fully out of the streets. He seemed to follow trouble and trouble seemed to follow him. He faced numerous criminal charges, including assault, attempted murder, weapons possession, failure to file tax returns, illegal possession of prescription drugs, and child support charges. He even said it himself in an interview that he was never fully out of the streets. He had the wrong people around him who kept him in that street mentality despite having all the chances to leave it behind. It was a fault of his own mentality where he felt he had to quote-unquote keep it real. These legal problems cost him time and took away his heat. He would serve a year there, 2 there, a few months there, and so on, and that wasn't good for him as a public figure. And just generally for his life, it just wasn't good for him. In 2014, after being released from a prison stint, Beanie was the victim of a drive-by shooting outside his home in New Jersey. According to the police, though, he wasn't the intended target of that shooting. He survived the incident but had to undergo surgery whereby one of his lungs ended up being removed. That changed the character of his voice dramatically, and it was a huge blow to him because his voice was one of the uniquely identifying features of him as an artist. In my opinion, he's still very dope. One of his best appearances after the voice change is on the song Reflections by Tsu Surf, which features Beanie spitting with conviction about how he doesn't like the way hip-hop has changed and the drive for society to emasculate men and make women less feminine. In that performance, you can hear the intensity and sincerity in his voice and his words. This comes to show that his key character traits didn't change despite the change in his voice. No doubt to him though, it was a big blow. It kind of reminds me of the DOC who had a car crash and he lost his voice, but he still managed to release albums and he still managed to have a career in music as a writer and in other aspects behind the scenes. So there still is a future for Beanie Sigel if he chooses to come back. He is one of those artists who is so authentic and so unique that having him back in the game would be great for hip-hop. Beanie was ultimately a product of his environment and time. To quote a famous line which he himself used in his song Die, "If you live by the sword, you die by the sword." Beanie didn't die from all the street drama, but having a lot of it around definitely derailed his momentum and affected his music career. The sad thing about it is that a lot of his misfortune could have been avoided if he left the streets and concentrated on doing things the clean way. But hindsight is 2020. The most we can do is to look at the mistakes he made, learn from them, and hopefully never place ourselves in unfavorable situations, especially when we have positive alternatives.